So, you've probably seen the headlines flying around, OpenAI data breach. And look, that sounds pretty scary, right? Anytime a huge tech company is in the news for something like this, it's easy to think the worst. But the real story here is actually a lot more nuanced. So let's get into it and break down what really happened, who was actually affected, and what it means for you. Okay, first things first. Yes, there was a breach, and yes, it affected some OpenAI users. But, and this is a huge but, it was not a hack of OpenAI's main systems. Your chat histories, your prompts, the AI models themselves, all of that is safe and sound. This whole incident was really limited to a specific group. And as you're about to see, the problem didn't even start with OpenAI. So here it is, the most important takeaway for probably 99% of you watching. If you're a regular user of ChatGPT or Sora through their websites, your data was not touched. You're in the clear. This incident was all about some of the users on the API platform. Now, if you're not familiar, the API is basically the developer toolkit that lets people build OpenAI's tech into their own apps. So unless you're a developer using that toolkit, you can breathe a big sigh of relief. To really get what happened, we need to play detective for a minute and follow the trail. It turns out the vulnerability wasn't inside OpenAI's fortress at all. The weak link was actually one of their outside partners. The company where the breach actually happened is called Mixpanel. You might not have heard of them, but they're a pretty big deal in the world of analytics. Companies use them to figure out how people are using their apps and websites. OpenAI was using them just for their API platform, and that is where the attacker found their way in. And when you look at this timeline, what's really wild is just how quickly this all unfolded. On November 8th, Mixpanel spots the intrusion. The very next day, just 24 hours later, they're on the phone with OpenAI letting them know an investigation is on. It then took them a couple of weeks to figure out the exact damage, and on November 25th, they handed over the list of who was affected. So how did the bad guys get in? Well, they used a technique called smishing. It's basically phishing's sneaky cousin. Instead of a bogus email, the attacker sends a text message that looks legit. They trick an employee into clicking a bad link or giving up their password, and boom, that's exactly how they got a foothold inside Mixpanel's network. Okay, so this brings us to the million-dollar question, especially for anyone who was affected. What information actually got out into the wild? Let's break down exactly what was compromised, and maybe even more importantly, what was kept safe. This right here tells the whole story. On the left, you've got the exposed data. It was mostly account metadata, things like the name and email used for the API account, a general location, and some techie details about your browser. Annoying, for sure. But now, look at the column on the right. This is the crucial part. Absolutely no chat history, no prompts, no passwords, and thankfully, no API keys or payment info. All of the really sensitive core data stayed locked down. So, with the breach found and the damage assessed, what happened next? How did the two companies in the hot seat respond? Well, to their credit, the actions they took were both fast and pretty decisive. OpenAI's response was pretty much by the book. First, they yanked Mixpanel out of their live systems to stop any more data from being shared. Then, they started the process of directly emailing every single person affected. And then, and this is a big deal, they completely terminated their contract with Mixpanel. They're also using this as a wake-up call to do a deep dive on the security of all their vendors. Mixpanel, for their part, went into full-on crisis mode. They locked down the affected accounts, brought in outside cybersecurity experts to investigate, did a global password reset for their entire staff, and started rolling out new security measures to make sure this kind of thing can't happen again. You know, this whole incident isn't just a story about OpenAI or Mixpanel. It's a perfect case study for a much bigger conversation that affects the entire tech industry. It's about how security works in our modern, interconnected world. This is a textbook example of what's known as supply chain risk. See, in today's world, no company is an island. The safety of your data doesn't just depend on the one company you gave it to. It depends on the security of all their partners and their partners' partners. One weak link anywhere along that chain can cause a huge problem for everyone. And AI security expert David Schwed really nailed it with this quote. He said that modern AI systems aren't self-contained fortresses. They're these complex, sprawling networks. And this incident shows exactly how a security gap at what seems like a minor partner, like an analytics vendor, can put the whole system at risk. So what does this all boil down to for you, especially if you were one of the API users who got that notification email? Well, the good news is the risk is pretty specific, and there are some simple, clear things you can do to stay safe. The number one threat to watch out for now is targeted phishing. Think about it. The attackers have a list of names and emails of people they know are developers using OpenAI's API. That lets them create some really convincing scam emails. They might pretend to be from OpenAI support, telling you to verify your account or that your API key has been compromised. Okay, so here's your game plan. Be extra suspicious of any unexpected emails about your OpenAI account. Always look at the sender's email address and make sure it's coming from an official domain. But most importantly, just burn this into your brain. OpenAI will never ask you for your password or API keys over email, period. And if you haven't already, please go turn on multi-factor authentication. It's the single best layer of defense you can add to any online account. And when you step back, this whole thing really leaves us with a much bigger question. It's a reminder that when we give our data to a company we trust, we're also implicitly trusting this whole invisible web of other companies we've never even heard of. It really forces you to ask, in this incredibly connected world, who are you really trusting with your data?